can be with those people, right? Whether we do that or sometimes what we try to do is we try to say, you know what, let's stand hand in hand next to the table. Let's not even deal with that. But what is the problem even in that? So whether I'm on top of the table or I'm under the table or I'm trying to bring people on top of the table or I'm trying to get under the table or I'm trying to stand next to the table, what is the core problem with that relationship?
You're always trying to go somewhere else.
I'm always trying to go somewhere else in relationship to what?
The table.
The table. So when we talk about diversity stuff and we talk about cultural competence stuff, part of our problem is that we're always trying to relate what we're doing to the table. What might we call this table that sets up this dynamic that allows people access to resources, access to seeing a large, big picture, and limits people's ability to see a big picture? What might we call that table?
Education.
We might call it education. What else might we call it?
Economics. Money, yeah.
We might call it money, economics. What else might we call it?
It's a division.
It's a division. What might we call it?
Power.
We might call it stereotypes. We might call it power. What else might we call it?
Segregation.
We might call it segregation. What might we call it?
Culture.
What's that?
Culture.
We might call it culture. What else might we call it?
Bad names.
Band-aids. We might
names.
Oh, bad names. I'm sorry. I'm getting older and I can't hear so well. What else might we call it?
Status.
Status. What else might we call it?
Discrimination.
Discrimination. What are the forms of discrimination?
Age.
Age discrimination. We might call it age discrimination. We might call it what?
Gender.
Gender. What else do we call gender discrimination? Sexism. Right? What else might we call it? Racial discrimination or racism. Right? So if we're constantly relating to the table, it becomes difficult to do anything because in any combination that we do this, the predominant paradigm is what? The table. So if we want to change how we see the world, change who we are, we want to relate to people better, we have to remove the table. Otherwise, we're just shuffling stuff around, right? So there's that. I want to talk a little bit about culture and cultural competence. So this is, I don't know if you've seen this movie, most of you probably have. The Titanic, have you seen that? Right? So this is the Titanic, and then this is Leonardo DiCaprio in the front. I'm king of the world! You know, all that kind of stuff, right? So what was it that did the Titanic in? It was the iceberg, right? But what made the iceberg so dangerous?
Underneath the water.
Right? So they could see the iceberg, but what they couldn't see was under the water. All right? So you may want to take out a pencil or paper for this particular piece. So what we have is the iceberg of culture, if you will. All right? And there are the pieces that you can see and things that you can't see. And the things that you can see, we will call artifacts of a culture. Right? So what are some things that you can see about a culture?
Right.
What's that?
Can or cannot? Is it can?
That you can see about a culture.
The dress.
Okay? So how they dress. What else?
Habits.
Their habits? Give me a specific one.
I don't know. Going to temple every Friday, every Right.
So I will, I'll put this as habits, and in that particular context that you're talking about is kind of faith habits, right? So they're religious practices, right? Something else you can see about a culture.
Is it a language?
Yeah, language. Even if you can't read Chinese, you know what it looks like, right? In comparison to English, for example, right? What else?
Their food.
Food.
Housing.
Housing. And not just where, but the style in which people decorate their homes and how they do that. What else?
Traditions,
Like what? Give me an example.
like baptisms or, I don't know.
Okay, so we're back to that
Easy
religious
there.
stuff.
Family.
Festivals, their festivals.
Yeah,
Okay.
Customs.
So customs, family roles. I'm going to put music, dance, art. These are all things that you can see about a culture, right? And so that's such a small part of the overall iceberg. And to be quite honest, these things mean nothing if you're not able to get to this part of the iceberg. All right? And so these things are the fruit of the greater values of a culture. So what are some of the things that are the greater values of a culture that you might not be able to see unless you're in that culture? Yes, sir. History? Okay. What else? We refer to this as deep culture.
Interactions with insiders and outsiders?
Okay. What else? Yes, ma'am.
See their beliefs.
Yeah, their beliefs. What else?
Cultural norms.
Cultural norms. Do you have any examples of cultural norms?
Like whether like it's a matriarch or
Okay. Yep, so if it's a matriarch or a patriarch, relationship to time. Some cultures believe in being in time, which means whenever I get there, it's the right time, right? Other people believe on being on time, right? Other people believe that things happen when I get there, right? So for example, in sunny cultures, where the sun was predominant, what do you think people thought about time? Are growing seasons long or short, where the sun?
Long.
Yeah, pretty long, right? So am I in a rush to necessarily plant, grow, harvest? Probably not, right? Not as much as if I'm in a colder climate, right? Where I have to be aware of the time because winter comes and it's relentless, right? So my relationship to my geographic environment has a lot to do with how my social group has determined what time it is. I would also say relationship with God or a greater being, or no relationship with God or a greater being, right? These are all things. The sense of beauty. What is beautiful? Right? So all of these things are extremely important because these are expressions of this stuff. And so what we typically do is we take all this stuff that we can see and we all of this stuff, we categorize that stuff as stereotypes. So these become the stereotypes for each group that we encounter, right? And what mass media does is it takes those stereotypes and it blows them up into huge proportions. Now, so when we have this culture interacting with another culture, we have a culture clash. Very much like when you played a game, when you played the game with another group that had a different set of rules, all of a sudden you had friction because there was somewhat of a culture clash. All right? This last part, and then I think I have one more exercise, and then our time will be done. One of the things that is coming up in a lot of conversation online, I don't know if anyone is familiar with David Duke. If anyone is old enough to remember David Duke, he ran for president in, I think, 92. But David Duke was one of the grand wizards of the Ku Klux Klan coming out of Louisiana. And since failing as a, is anyone familiar with the Grand Dragons of the Ku Klux Klan? Anyone familiar with the Ku Klux Klan? Is that a group that's familiar to people? Okay. Cool. Just not nice people, right? And so being a Grand Dragon means he was really big in the organization and high in the organization. And since then, he's gone and gotten his PhD. And he has these online shows, and so he's Dr. David Duke, because his insanity needs to be supported by somebody, right? So, but he's doing this thing where he talks about the bell curve of intelligence planet-wide. So he talks about the bell curve of intelligence planet-wide. And I always think it's interesting that anybody who studies stuff like that, and they come out with these reports, that their group is always towards the top. I don't care what study it is, you know, that their group is never at the bottom. When they do those studies, their group is always at the top. And so what he says is that there's a bell curve of IQ, intelligent quotient, around the planet. And he says that certain groups innately have higher IQs than others, and therefore we should not expect certain things from different groups and so forth and so on. And so he tries to use this to justify his racism and narcissism, right? And so, you know, one of the questions I ask is, IQ for what? Right? IQ for what? So when I started thinking about, you know, IQ, this is some of the stuff that came up for me, was that there is you, and this is your personality, right? So it's you and your personality, your quirks, whether you're blue or orange or yellow or red, your personality stuff. And then there's the physical part of you, which is your DNA. So your parents came together, they mixed their DNA, and voila, there you are, right? And then you are then influenced by your community, so that the environment in which you grow up in, right? If you grew up in a rural environment or an urban environment, that has a lot to do with shaping and molding who you are. And then your educational level, again, related to your community, whether your parents believed in formal education or informal education, whether you're part of 4-H or you were part of the honor society, that has a lot to do with how we develop it as individuals. And then that is connected to our government. So the geographic region that we live in has a certain kind of government, right? So our government is called a what? Is it a democracy?
Republic.
Is it a republic? You guys live here. What do we have?
Republic.
We have a representative democracy, which means what?
We have a say in some of our leaders.
We vote for the leaders that vote for us, right? So they make decisions on our behalf. There are other places where they don't have